As railroads expanded across the U.S. in the late 1800s, passenger trains were becoming popular for travelers across the country. These train cars, owned by the Pullman Company, were staffed by former slaves known as Pullman Porters, with the majority of them coming from the south of Chicago. It all started when George Pullman realized that people would pay good money to ride some fancy trains with hotel-style amenities, chandeliers, and dining cars and all the things. And he would only hire emancipated men as porters and black women as maids. But his intentions wasn't good. He only wanted to hire recently freed people because he believed that as former slaves, they would be compliant workers. He could underpay them since they didn't have many employment options outside of sharecropping. And that's how Pullman became the largest employer of African Americans in the country. But his intentions backfired because the Pullman Porters actually turned out to become a great resource for our people. Although George Pullman viewed them as servants he could exploit, the porters themselves didn't see themselves that way, and they transformed their jobs into one of dignity and purpose. Through their savings, they created the backbone of a growing black middle class and were highly respected in their communities for their knowledge and experience. The roots of the black working class, Blair Kelly tells the story, for instance, of a young man about 23 traveling to San Francisco, but he didn't really know anything about it. When a Pullman Porter found out that he was headed that way, he suggested that he should get off at Oakland because there weren't enough blacks in San Francisco to help him, but he could find help in Oakland and he could find a room to rent. Long story short, West Oakland became the young man's home where he found a job, a place to stay, and a community. This is what the Pullman Porters did. They connected blacks traveling during the Great Migration by connecting them to jobs and living spaces for rent. Because they were well-traveled, these porters also witnessed lynchings and violence and became beacons of resistance by carrying copies of the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Carrier, newspapers that helped to guide people navigating new cities. They spread information from the North by bundling black-run newspapers and throwing them off trains throughout the South. Working conditions for the porters was not easy. They were paid little and routinely worked 400 hours a month, serving passengers for up to 21 hours a day. They also had to buy their own uniforms. Most famously, porters could convert sitting areas into beds. And while these innovations was comfortable for the passengers, they created more work for the porters. Remember, Pullman's reason for hiring formerly enslaved blacks in the first place was basically, for lack of a better way to put it, to continue to treat them like slaves, to continue to treat them like servants, to not pay them, to overwork them. But even this created another huge influence the porters had on the U.S. working economy. Pullman ran his company with an iron fist, and most of the porters relied on tips, which is what popularized tipping in the U.S. Even though tipping existed before the Pullman Porters, the practice of tipping as we know it in the United States is largely attributed to the Pullman Company because the workers heavily relied on tipping as a primary source of income for, again, the predominantly black porters who were paid very low wages, effectively making tipping a key part of their pay structure. So the Pullman Porters also played a significant role in popularizing and solidifying the practice of tipping across the country. Under the leadership of Asa Philip Randolph, they eventually formed the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters Union in 1925. Though never a porter himself, Randolph was revered by the BSCP members for his negotiating skills. 10 years later, the union was finally recognized as the sole collective bargaining representative for rail porters and maids.
I'd like to know if you're interested in unionizing the Pullman Porters.
You want to fight the Pullman Company? Come on, let's take a photo.
And when Rosa Parks was arrested for desegregating that bus in 1955, it was the Pullman Porters Union that successfully fundraised for her defense.